This is taken from one of 6 essays written for Sewanee Review from 1913 to 1915 by Ambrose Robert Hite Ranson, born 1831, died 1919, about his growing up years living at his family home Gapview and his experiences during the Civil War as a Confederate officer. His observations are very informative about daily life pre-war amid unacceptable observations condoning the enslavement of other human beings. His account is still important in its rendering of daily work on a farm in the 1840s and 50s in Jefferson County, Virginia, one of the most agricultural counties in the Virginias. These conditions were substantially different in the northern Shenandoah Valley when compared to the brutal monocultures in the Deep South. Enslavement in Jefferson County, based on writings of those, white and black, who lived here then, was one of diverse work, the pervasive fear of being sold south, pockets of profound cruelty, and the tantalizing nearness of the option of escaping to freedom. A Life of Leisure on the Backs of Others. Ambrose Ranson's enthusiastic elegy. The most remarkable feature of the situation in our section was that refinement and even elegance could exist on such very small means. A man with a small farm, say 300 acres, worth about $12,000 and a few slaves, was really a prince. A prince of the kind that no millionaire of the present day in 1913 can even emulate. The head of the house was free from some of the carking cares which beset the most favored people of the present age. He had leisure to think, to read, to cultivate his mind and manners, and to indulge himself in social pleasure. He was a better educated man, a better read man in current and ancient literature, and he was a better-mannered man than the man of the present age. Freed from little worries, his temper was better, his heart was softer, and his disposition more sunny and genial. I have known men of this stamp who knew well their Homer and their Thucydides, their Bacon and their Shakespeare, and were ready and apt in quotations, and at the same time were not lifted above current events, but rather gave themselves the preference in conversation, using their knowledge of the past in illustration of events of the present. Among such people, social events were very different from those of the present day. A friend of mine told me of a dinner in New York the other day at which 2,500 millions of dollars were present. He told me nothing of the people, what they said, what they did. He only told me in bated breath of the money. Such a dinner in olden times was, of course, unknown. I can remember some of those dinners when the ladies had retired and the decanters of old Madeira went circling round over the polished mahogany. In our neighborhood, there was a debating society which met at the different farmhouses in winter every Saturday night, the host at each meeting being ex officio chairman. The debate was of unusual excellence, although there were the usual ridiculous failures. The farmers were not only people who lived in the country, there were artists, most notably David Strother, afterwards General Strother of the Federal Army, who in the late 40s and early 50s, under the nom de plume Port Crayon, wrote for Harper's Magazine and illustrated his writings. Alexander R. Bowler, who was in Congress at one time and was an orator as well as a caricaturist, and Henry Bettinger, orator, poet, and wit, who during his short life represented his district in Congress and had been also minister to Denmark and a friend and favorite of the king. And the parson, the rector of our church, lived on a farm and reared a family of 12 children, among them 8 of the wildest boys. One Saturday, the debate was at our house, and I remember it well from an amusing incident. We had Stan with us, a cousin who had lately taken a wife and had brought her to make our acquaintance. During the day, he told my father he thought he would like to speak up on the question of the evening. He was posted on it and had thought much upon the subject. My father told him that after the regular debate was over, anyone could speak. When the regular debaters had finished their very able efforts, my cousin George sprang to his feet. He was usually a mild, amiable sort of young man, but now he looked quite fierce and determined, and stretching out his right arm began, "Mr. President, it strikes me..." But somehow he stuck there. My father bowed and smiled encouragingly, and he began again. "Mr. President, it strikes me..." And still the words did not come. And yet a third time he took on an attitude of defiance and, stretching out his right arm, said, "Mr. President, it strikes me..." Now his little wife was sitting over in the corner behind some other ladies, and when he came out for the third time with his "Mr. President, it strikes me," she leaned forward and very quietly said, "Dumb, George." Instantly turned and looked at her, his fierce face breaking into a smile as he said, "My dear, you are quite right. It strikes me dumb." And down he sat. And this was my cousin George's speech. I have often thought I inherited some of my cousin George's talent for public speaking, for whenever I have been called upon, no matter how full I thought I was of ideas upon the subject, a very ocean of impendent eloquence, a rapidly receding wave swept all away, leaving me, intellectually, a stranded wreck, and as dumb as my poor cousin. On the evenings of debate, the company always adjourned to the dining room, where a supper of cold turkey, ham, etc., was washed down with good old Madeira. And the women, the matrons and the maids of that time, their soft voices and their gentle ways, they were generally educated at home by governesses. Every girl had her maid who waited on her, and she was a stranger to drudgery. I have seen a girl of 13 take the head of her father's table in her mother's absence and play hostess in such a simple and sweet fashion as would charm her father's guests. She had watched her mother in these trying ordeals and had insensibly learned her lesson. And when it came her turn to preside at her husband's table and take upon herself the cares of a family, then the John Brown raid came in October 1859 as a clap of thunder from a clear sky. And when the great Civil War came, with what splendid heroism this young woman stood at her post at home and sent her husband and her sons to battle. And when the struggle was ended, with what uncomplaining cheerfulness she undertook the drudgeries of her altered circumstances.